Hello, my name is David Lee, and today we're going to talk about Bicep Module. As usual, we will talk about a use case that will be the driver around as we start coding the Bicep Module implementation details. So to start off with Contoso, we'll be starting to manage the SQL Server and database with infrastructure as code. And so Bicep was actually the perfect choice for that. And with that, right, they're also going to be managing their SQL admin username and password using an existing instance of Azure Key Vault, right, which is a shared resource. The other thing about their requirement is, they will only want to allow traffic from selected IP ranges, and initially, this is going to be kind of their office IP range. So this is what they're going to be passing in. So we can think a little bit about the implementation that it needs to be parameterized. And then the last thing that they need to follow is tagging, obviously, and again, we follow the same convention of having a purpose of the resource and owner. So let's take a look at a design and architectural design, right before we write any code. It's always good to have that design in front to make sure that we understand what needs to be implemented. And so again, we have an Azure Key Vault instance that is already there, right? And so this does not need to be part of the Bicep implementation. But from a DevOps perspective, right, we need to reference Azure Key Vault for the admin username and password, right, for those secrets. Our Bicep does need to create the two databases, App1 and App2, which is going to be part of that Bicep infrastructure as code, and also define the SQL Server. And from that perspective, right, the firewall is actually on the SQL Server level, and so that's going to be part of the parameter. So now that we have the use case, we can start to bring in the Bicep module concepts. In fact, right, as we talk about modules, which is kind of the third box on the right, we also need to use the concept of existing, right? Because we have an existing resource, which is the Azure Key Vault. We also want to make sure that the parameters are using the @secure parameter, right? Because those are secret, right? And so this is going to help us as we are starting to write the code on these few concepts here. In terms of implementation, once we finish writing our Bicep file, again, the same thing applies of being able to run our Bicep file with PowerShell, CLI, DevOps pipeline deployment tasks, or if we're using GitHub Actions, we have that GitHub deployment actions. So next, we'll jump into writing our Bicep file, and then we will be able to run that. All right, we're ready to start coding our Bicep deployment file. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to declare some parameters that we're going to be passing in. And if you have been watching my videos, I like to use the concept of stack names to define my resource names. So that's a convention that I'm using. The next thing that I'm going to pass in is the Key Vault name, because right, again, we are going to be using an existing Azure Key Vault. So we're going to be passing that in. The other thing about the reference is there also needs to be a resource group name where Azure Key Vault resides, right? So that's also required, and we're going to be passing that in. The other thing that we're going to declare is obviously the location, right? Because in Azure, all resources, well, there are global resources, but a lot of resources will need location. So the SQL Server itself is going to be located in Central US. And then we are going to configure our allowed IP for our office, right? So that's going to be a parameter by itself. The other thing that I'm going to declare here is tags. So this is actually a variable, and I'm going to give it a name of, again, the purpose, right? The purpose of this particular database. It's a shared SQL server, so just using that as the name. And then the owner will be perhaps is managed by like a team in Contoso. So perhaps it's the SQL database or DBA team, right? So I'm just giving a generic name, team one. All right, so here I'm going to reference Azure Key Vault, okay? And before I reference it, I would be going to reference, I'm sorry, going to make sure that the resource type is known, which is a Azure Key Vault, right? So I'm going to be using the preview version, and this is where we need to use the existing keyword, right? So that Bicep knows that this is an existing resource, right? We don't necessarily have to create it, but we need it here for referencing it. The other thing that we're gonna do here is we're gonna declare the scope, right, of this particular resource. So I'm gonna give it a subscription ID of where this key vault resides, and also pass in the make sure everything looks good. Sorry, the resource group that it exists in, right? So this will become the scope for Azure Key Vault. And the next thing that we're gonna probably be doing is we're gonna be declaring the SQL, right? So again, the goal here is to be able to reference the Azure Key Vault secrets, which is the admin user and the admin password, and use that to configure our SQL server, right? So let's go ahead and declare our SQL server macrosoft.sql/servers, and we'll use the preview version here, and let's just create. So this is the name of the server. We're going to give it a location, and we're going to tag it, and then we're going to try to configure the administrator login. All right, so now we're going to do some referencing, and if you are, there is actually a helper function called get secret that we can use. And what I've done is I have already configured the secret, right? So which is the Contoso SQL Server username. Now there's an error, and we'll take a look at what the error is. So if we kind of read this line, right, we can see that this can only be used with the @secure decorator. So if we're passing that in, like admin username, right, as a parameter, and we were using like a secure, right, we can certainly do it this way, but we cannot just simply reference, and we're not going to be passing in the secret through the Bicep anyways. We want to reference it directly within the Bicep file. So this is why we need to start using the concept of a module, right? So essentially what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a SQL.bicep file here, and pass that in. So what I'm going to do is from the deploy.bicep, I'm going to call the SQL.bicep, and this is done through the module concept, right? Okay, so what do I need to do here first, right? I need to declare, right? And I need to declare the location, and I need to pass in the tags. And so the tags are actually an object. So what I'm going to do is, yep, I'm going to pass that in as objects. Okay. So for passing in the username, so I'm going to have a SQL username string. I'm going to declare a secure on that. And the next parameter will be the SQL password. Do a secure on that. So this is going to allow me to configure the username and password. And I'm going to do it from Key Vault. I'm going to declare, so this is something that will be in the docs, just using a specific version, and declaring maybe, just to demonstrate that, we can configure a whole bunch of things pretty easily with Bicep. So there we go, enable the public network access. So I'm going to also declare the database here. Microsoft SQL servers, oops. And I have to do database. Okay. So in this case, like as I have more and more database that I need to create, I'm not going to go to the SQL server to create them. I'm going to keep with the spirit of infrastructure as code and just keep adding them here. Perhaps I could do some array loops, decoration. But in right now, for now, I'm just going to do it this way. Just declare it location and tags. Let's see, name. Oh, I thought I selected databases. And that's why. All right, cool. So we'll continue. We're gonna do a skew. So so this also means you will be declaring the skew of your database through code as well. So it's just readable, and I'm using the basic for this demo, but you're probably going to have a more advanced or more capable tier of the SQL Server database. All right, so I'm going to declare properties collation. I'm going to use actually I have a string here that I'm just going to copy and paste, and this is kind of the default that I've always been using. And yeah, just going to copy and paste that for my second database. And yeah, I mean, I could have easily created an array, I guess, but just for this demo and example, I'm just going to clone it like this. Okay, so this is an external Bicep file, but we're gonna go back to our main Bicep file, and here I'm gonna declare a module, declare SQL module. I'm gonna say this is just gonna make it more clear here that this is a local to the deploy.bicep file. I'm going to give it a name. So this particular name will be used when in the deployment, right? So like if you go to your resource group and you look at deployments, this is the name that would exist there, right? So in theory, you might also want to parameterize this to maybe like a date kind of format so that you can, it doesn't overwrite this name each time. For our demo, we're just going to keep it this way, and I'm going to declare params. And let me make sure that, yeah, so what's the nice thing here, as we can see, is it's starting to tell us we're missing specific properties, which is configured in that other bicep file, right? So really bicep is wonderful because there's kind of that IntelliSense smart way of, built into it. So I'm just gonna, make use of it and leverage it. Yeah, actually, allowed IP should be configured, I think, because that's part of the SQL. So here we actually need to do one more thing, which is to declare the firewall rule. So Microsoft.SQL server, firewall rules, right? So we need that. Parent would be SQL. Name would be, let's call it allow office IP. And then for the properties, we will, there's actually a start and end. So what I believe needs to happen is we need to pass in the allowed IP. What did I name it here? And you know what? Yeah, we don't need to type it. Just all right. So just doing that, and we're good here. So allowed IP. Let's take a look. Stack name. SQL username, and this is where, remember, we got this super duper handy way of getting the secret, and I'm just gonna copy the name of the secret here, which I've configured earlier, and SQL password would be kv.getSecret, same thing. Let me go grab that key and paste it in here. And what am I missing is tags. Okay. All right, there we go. All right, so this completes our coding exercise. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to upload it to my local Cloud Shell, and then I will deploy it. All right, now we're ready to deploy our bicep file. And so the first thing that we need to do is let's actually take a look at our Azure Key Vault. And I have a command here ready to use. I did spend a little bit of time setting some variables ahead of time. So so here's my Key Vault name that I've configured, which is existing, and I'm just listing all the secrets in the Key Vault. And so we can see that Contoso SQL Server password and Contoso SQL Server usernames, those are already configured in that Azure Key Vault instance. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I am going to create a resource group for my deployment. So here we go. I'm going to create that bicep demo resource group. And so now that this is completed, the next thing that we need to do is we will run the deployment. So I'm just going to copy my deployment script over here. And we can go through that together. All right, so the deployment, right? So running bicep file is going to be using the AZ deployment CLI command. First of all, this is the deployment name, deploy-1. The group will be bicep demo. The template file is already here, which is the deploy.bicep. And to be clear, the SQL.bicep is also in this directory. And then now we're sending in the parameters. So the key vault name, the stack name, the resource group name, and the allowed IP. All right, so we'll give it a go here, and this should take several. Typically should be less than a minute or two. So we'll come back again when this is completed. All right, so it looks like the deployment has completed, and we're ready to go to that resource group, which I just did over here. And the database, the SQL Server, as we can see, is created. The two databases are created. The server is created. And now we're ready to leverage the database. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually use the query editor built in to the portal to log into my database, my server, my database. So and if we recall, this is actually the username that I passed in. So if you're using the portal, it will actually automatically show you your username, but obviously doesn't show you your password. So what I did here is I've launched my key vault secret, so I can just use this copy feature and come over here and log in. So if we had not configured the firewall rule to, like in my case, my home IP address, then I am not able to log in, right? But I actually have done that, so I should be able to log in fine, and looks good. So I am actually logged into my database. What I'm going to do is run a script here to create a table, a member table here, just to test to make sure it's working. So I do have my member table. I'm going to run a insert script here, and then I will run a select statement. So select star from I think members. There we go. Yep. So so the database is actually working fine. I'm able to execute commands with no issues. So this concludes um, uh, the module implementation, right? And we can see that we've accomplished all of our objectives of being able to have our database as code, our server as code. Our username and password is referenced from Azure Key Vault. So from a security perspective, right, that is a good best practice. And so hopefully this helps you. Thank you so much for watching.